Poisonees. Welcome to another episode of Expert Witness, our bonus series where we speak to special guests about some of the content we share on the show. Poison, true crime, weird history, cocktails, literature, and more. From historians and psychotherapists to authors and doctors, we speak to people from all walks of life with different areas of expertise. In this episode, we are talking to author A.J. West about his latest book, The Betrayal of Thomas True. The book is a thrilling piece of crime fiction, but it covers a part of history not widely known about: the Molly houses of Georgian London, the literal home of gay subculture in the capital at the time. We talk about the history and the crimes associated with these vibrant places and why they needed to exist, as well as other inspiration for the novel, and we'll also get into what it's really like being an author on the road and how to manage the reality of getting a book out there. AJ is a genuinely delightful person, and even though this was our first proper interview, you can probably tell it quickly became like a chat between old friends. For reference, this interview is sex positive throughout, and we will be discussing occasionally explicit historical facts, which may not be suitable for younger listeners. The Betrayal of Thomas True is published by Orenda, and it is available at all good bookshops and online. Please support independent suppliers wherever possible if you're thinking of reading this book. Enjoy! Hello AJ, how are you?
Well, good, thank you. Lovely to meet you properly for the first time.
You're on your book tour around the UK to celebrate the Betrayal of Thomas True. How are you? How's your sanity and how's it going?
It's going really well, actually. I organised the lion's share of my own book tour and I'm paying for it myself. But I decided, I've wanted to be an author since I was a little boy, and part of that dream was going to bookshops and meeting readers and talking about the book and signing books and doing all of those fun things. And I thought, well, some people would spend this money going on a cruise or on a package holiday or whatever. And I just thought, I'm going to spend it on going on my own kind of cruise, really, which is just driving around the whole of the UK to around 100 bookshops I'll have visited by the end of it. And yeah, just living the dream, I suppose. But it is pretty tiring, I have to admit, because I'm not one of life's great drivers. I don't love driving. I get stressed out. I'm a very safe driver, I hasten to add. Like, I'm a full-on
Nice.
60 miles an hour on the slow lane of the motorway guy.
Oh, great.
Like, I get no thrill from driving fast, quite the opposite. So I'm very safe, but yeah, it just tires me out. I always think I'm like one of those old mobile phones where the battery's got fat. So like if I'm on full charge in the morning, I'm great, like all is well with the world. But my battery runs down so ridiculously fast, and I get to about 30% and then it's 0%
Yeah.
5 minutes later, and the apps stop working. And like I don't know about anyone listening, but I get a thing called word blindness, and I don't know whether I've made that up or whether that's an actual thing. But it's the best way of describing it, where I just cannot think of basic words. And it may happen during this interview. I apologize if it does. But doing my talk about the book in bookshops, every single time I forget the word immunity. Every single time. And I have to say, and they were given, so basically their names were struck from the court records and no one was allowed to know who they were, and they weren't arrested.
Nice roundabout way of saying
immunity.
it, and everyone's going, what's the matter with him?
And what's the matter with me is that I may not have had my constitutional snooze.
I think we'll come on to the tour a bit more in a bit, because I think it's a really interesting, the way you've been documenting your book tour. But we must start, as ever. I need to know what you're drinking. It is 11 a.m. on a Sunday, so hopefully it's something strong.
I'm drinking tap water, which is for some people very controversial, isn't it? But I love my tap water. Got no issues with that at all. Like, some people have to drink bottled water, don't they? Because they're worried about it. But yes, I know it's a very boring answer. I'm sure you've had some really cool answers to that question, but I'm drinking a glass of tap water.
Often when I'm interviewing people that, they're trying to do the interview and they don't want to get hammered beforehand. So it's often just like a coffee or a water. So absolutely fine. I have an iced coffee on the go.
I was drinking Guinness last night, though.
Oh, nice. Well done. Well done. That is a decent drink.
I've really got into my Guinness.
Yeah. And in this weather, though, I question that, because I'm like, that is a chewy drink, a delicious drink. But
that's such a good description. Yeah, it is a very chewy drink. But it's become like my drink food while I'm on tour. If I allow myself 1 pint of Guinness in the evening, that's fine. I don't think it's necessarily good for the waistline, but hey ho.
It's all good. If you were to be drinking, obviously you like your Guinness, Do you have a favourite cocktail? Because, of course, at the Poisoner's Cabinet, we talk about true crime and murder, but cocktails are a very big thing in there. So if you were to have a cocktail, what would be your cocktail of choice?
I don't know if this is a bit footballer's wives, but I really love an espresso martini.
Ooh.
Partly because I then get to ask the person making it whether they can do me a decaf espresso martini, and they look at me like the world's biggest idiot, and they're not wrong. But if I drink an espresso martini, I'm like a proper nana. Like I cannot sleep till about 1 o'clock in
Yeah.
the morning. But I treated myself. I was in Cheltenham, don't you know, visiting bookshops a week and a bit ago on the tour, and I took myself to quite a smart restaurant. So I just felt like I needed to celebrate some good news, and I sat there on my own, which I love. I love dining on my own, and I
Mm.
got myself an espresso martini and just listened to this piano music, and just felt like life was good.
That is a good day. I love a solo dining as well. I think, if you're comfortable in your own company, as long as you just block out the voices in your head, obviously, but just have a nice cocktail to chill and yeah, give yourself a reward. That's a lovely evening.
Yeah, exactly. I
Yeah.
think in this country, in the UK, like dining on your own isn't seen as a strange thing. But I've seen TikToks and things of Americans being totally confused by the whole concept of going
Yeah.
to eat on your own. But I think it's really nice. You can watch people, and as a novelist, that is my
Mm.
bread and butter, watching people,
Yeah.
and sometimes in quite a creepy way. Like I find myself really kind of edging my chair sideways so that I can catch the conversation because it's fascinating the things people talk about. Or in fact, what I love most is couples who sit having an entire meal and they don't say a word to each other.
Oh, that is good. That is good entertainment value. I think when you're watching them, you're like, oh my god, why aren't you talking? Who had the
It
row?
goes either way, right? Like either it's because they hate each other, or
Mm.
it's because they love each other so much they don't even realize they're not talking. They're just enjoying each other's
Oh.
company, and there's really nothing they have to say. They don't have to talk about work or the next door neighbors or the row they had 2 years ago. They're through that, and actually they're just enjoying their food and enjoying the surroundings. And the other thing that I do enjoy listening to, I have to say as well, is dates, first dates or second dates.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, some of the stuff these guys come out with.
Yeah. Just the painful trying to make small talk or trying to say things. There's nothing like listening in on a first date and kind of probably you can gauge the reaction from people around you who are listening going, is this going, if you're not sure if it's going well, look at the people who are listening in on your first date, and if their face is like death, you're like, oh god, I'm screwing this up.
Yeah,
Love it.
exactly.
So for our listeners as well, let's talk about you and why we're here today. We're talking about your new book, The Betrayal of Thomas True, but if you don't mind, to sort of introduce yourself to those who don't know you, and who is AJ West.
Well, I never know quite what to put in and leave out. So, yeah, grew up in Milton Keynes, went to comprehensive school, was head boy. Is that too much detail? Moving on. I was a broadcast journalist. I worked for commercial radio and then ended up at the BBC. I was a reporter at Radio 1 and I produced some programs on Radio 2. And then I went to Northern Ireland, where I was a TV news reporter and reader. And then I got into a little bit of trouble there because after 4 years, as I was the first openly gay newsreader on to read the television news in Northern Ireland.
Mm.
So I took issue with an award that they were wanting to give to a boxer called Tyson Fury. And
Mm.
I just put something on my personal Facebook. I forgot that half the friends on my personal Facebook were journalists, ended up on the front page of the paper the next morning, and just cut a long story short, ended up suspended and sacked. So that was kind of the end of a 15-year career as a journalist, and was really like setting a match to my whole life, frankly.
Mm.
And then ended up on a very randomly on a program called Big Brother,
Yeah.
where I had a mysterious call from a guy who flew over and said, "We think you'd be a really good Big Brother housemate." And so I spent 8 weeks locked inside a house with a bunch of lunatics, frankly, being filmed 24 hours a day, even on the toilet. So that kind of turned my already panic attacky, quite possibly ADHD head inside out, squeezed it out like a mop, and then stuck it back in my skull. So it's all relevant because it was coming out of the other end of that extraordinary period of
Mm.
stress and excitement and uncertainty when I then hit the booze quite hard,
Mm.
and there were some drugs and stuff for a year. I was effectively
Mm.
homeless. I had no job, no career. My relationship broke down. I lost friendships. and I lost myself, frankly.
Yeah.
And it was my writing that saved me because, well, my writing and my now husband, but it was my writing that saved me, certainly in the early kind of months
Mm.
of that experience when I just was twisting in the wind, because I'd always been too scared to try to be a novelist because I knew it was my life's dream and I knew
Mm.
it would be a load of rejection and I probably wouldn't get published and I would fail. And I just,
Yeah.
all my life I thought, I can fail at things that aren't my dream, but if I fail at the
Mm.
thing that matters to me most in the world, then it's almost like
Mm.
that word fail would be tattooed then onto
Yeah.
my body. And I knew that I wasn't necessarily strong enough for that. But when you're so broken and you have so little to hold on to, there's nothing to lose. So I thought, well, it can't possibly get worse. There was one point after Big Brother that kind of summed it up. I was walking around Primark and I was quite publicly crying, trying to find a shirt and a jumper because the weather was getting cold. And
Yeah.
it was this weird juxtaposition of people thinking, well, they recognize you because you've been on telly. So they think that you're living this Ryland Clark Neal dream life.
Mm.
And actually, I was living a nightmare, really. And so I was having a bit of a week, and my ex-boyfriend, had just kind of moved out and stuff. And there were these two ladies over the other side of the big pile of jumpers that you get in that shop,
Mm.
and they were talking about me like I
Oh my
wasn't there,
God.
like fully within earshot. Oh, he was on Big Brother. Oh, yes, well, he got cheated on by his boyfriend while he was on the program. Yeah, I didn't like him very much. Well, I thought he was quite nice. This whole conversation was going on. And I was literally
Wow.
standing no more than 3 feet away. When you're living that life of
Yeah.
quasi non-celebrity celebrity, it's very hard to actually get a sense of what your dignity is and you lose your personality. So I was then being
Mm.
sent by my agent at the time on programs to give my opinions about all sorts of nonsense things because my background is a journalist. And I
Yeah.
found myself taking part in debates and conversations that I didn't care about necessarily, or being encouraged to have opinions that I didn't have for the sake of
Yeah.
television. Um,
Yeah.
so long and short of it is I kind of completely lost grip on who I was and my principles and what I wanted to be. And
Mm.
it was through writing my debut novel, The Spirit Engineer, which is about a guy who loses his grip on who he is and his principles in pursuit of the fantastical, that I
Mm.
managed to reconnect, I suppose, with who
Yeah.
who I wanted to be.
You've always been very open and you're very happy to talk about your past and who you are, and I think it's one of the things that seems to shine through in your books as well, is that they feel very real. The characters feel honest, certainly in Betrayal of Thomas Tree, which we'll come on to. But there's a real humanity, I think, through the books. But when you're on social media and you talk about your book, you're very honest about who you are and living that life and sort of taking away maybe the veil of, oh, all authors' lives are just lovely and champagne and sort of being driven in a car to a lovely event and then going off to a lovely hotel. People don't always see behind the curtain. And for an author to have lived through experiences like you have and to have struggled and kind of in feeling that raw emotion and then coming to writing as a later stage, we don't often see that with authors. We get maybe glimpses of it. We get little snippets from whatever the press release says when people put out, a little slice of it. But you seem quite, whether it's comfortable is the right word, being who you are through and through.
I think I have to be. If I tried to pretend that everything was roses, I would feel like fraud, and that would add to my anxiety. It's a
Mm.
release for me to be able to share with people what it's really like. And I'm not pretending that I'm living, a terribly difficult life, but it's certainly not glamorous what I'm doing. The hotels I'm staying, if I can afford a hotel, whatever's cheapest, and I'm doing a lot of sofa surfing on
Mm.
this tour because I can't afford to put myself on a full UK tour. In fairness to other authors, there's really very, very rare that even the biggest, richest publishers would
Mm.
send someone on a full UK tour. These days, generally, you just go to the odd event. But yeah, you see authors with their, rainforest shower or their roll top bath and a massive squidgy four-poster bed in some country house hotel
Mm.
because they're going to a book event. That isn't what I'm doing. And even though that would be nice occasionally, I have to say it kind of suits me roughing it a little bit. In the last few days, I've been to bookshops in Bradford and Barnsley and Hull and just bookshops around the country, ones that and Wakefield. And these bookshops
Mm.
are run by really passionate people, and there's some great restaurants, great pubs, really friendly people. My God, the last 5 days, like the friendliness of
Mm.
the people in the places I've been has just been like a ray of
Yeah.
sunshine in my life. But most authors kind of don't get to those bookshops because they're smaller, and you're not going to sell
Mm.
enough books to pay for your petrol and your stay and all that kind of stuff. So it's not. Even last night I was talking to an author who said, well, I don't really tend to do a bookshop tour because it doesn't sell enough books to make it financially worth it. And I was like, you're
Mm.
totally missing the point. It's not
It's
about.
an investment, though, isn't it? Yeah, you are marketing yourself, and it's an investment, but it's also an experience. It must be.
It's an unforgettable experience. I love this country. I love the people, and I love meeting new people. But I tell you what, okay, so you sell 15 books or 20 books. That for me, I don't know if people listening know this, but I probably make around about £1 a book that's sold
Mm.
hardback. So I've made 15 to £20, I guess you could say. And I won't get that money till March next year in 2025 anyway. So it's definitely not about the money. Of course it's not. But it is priceless, the conversation and getting to know the bookseller and just being there and being present and supporting that bookshop. I was at an event and a reader came up and she had a tattoo of my first book on one arm, and another reader came up and said, I've
Wow.
never met you before, but I was really, really poorly in hospital and I read your book in hospital and it kind of got me through and I really loved it. That is worth 1,000 books, really, because those
Yeah.
people are supporting me and they're enthusiastic about my writing. And if no one's reading and loving your books, I don't write for my own pleasure. I write because I love the idea of
Yeah.
people reading my stories.
You've mentioned your past, and you've mentioned how you came to writing and the reality of touring as well from that, which it's hard work, as you've said. But there's also a huge amount of celebration here because the book, Betrayal of Thomas True, is a Sunday Times bestseller. You're on the list, you're number 2 on there. The book is a huge success and is getting brilliant reviews across the board. I've read it and loved it, and I'll speak about that. But yeah, do you give yourself time to really enjoy that? That is a massive
Oh,
cause
it's
for
huge. I
celebration.
mean, me, my publisher, my agent, we kind of thought we might squeak into the top 10 if we were lucky. If it was a quiet week, we might get the number 10 spot. And, that would have been fantastic. And I, I was sick. I mean, genuinely physically ill on the day when we would know
Mm.
how it had ranked and how many copies we'd managed to sell. I got myself into a right old mess, to be honest, about
Mm.
the whole thing because it had been 2 years writing and all of the months of, trying to promote. There's no marketing budget for the book because I'm with a fantastic indie publisher, but there's not the budget for that. So I was up against books that had six-figure marketing
Mm.
budgets and things, and fair play to them. But
Mm.
I thought I'm not going to be able to compete with that. So when my agent called me up, I was upstairs in Booker Bookshop in Oswestry. The phone went bang on 3 o'clock, which is when he said he would call. And he told me, in fact, I'm getting a
Mm.
bit emotional talking about it now, but he told me that it was number 2, and I just folded in half on a chair and wept. And people in the bookshop were staring at me like I was a complete insane person. But it meant so much to me in that moment. It meant all
Mm.
the things it shouldn't mean. It meant validation.
Mm.
It meant that I belonged. It meant that I was welcome. It meant that my book was worth something. It meant that my hard work had paid. All of those things you're not
Mm.
really meant to feel, it did. And I can't, I can't lie about that. And I thought of myself only, a few short years ago and where I was. And if I'd have been able to go back and give him a hug and
Yeah.
say it's okay, just follow your dream and
Yeah.
use your talent and do your best and work hard, and it'll be okay. So
Yeah.
it was a really emotional thing.
It is emotional. I'm welling up now. Actually, this is why do you do this, AJ? You do it
I
with a
was
book, and now the
I'll cheer
story.
you up.
It's like,
You're not meant to care about that stuff. All of these self-help books say, don't worry about validation. Don't ask anyone else for your own worth and all this kind of stuff. Like, I'm sorry. Unfortunately, I have this illness called being human. And it doesn't matter how many times I listen to self-help or advice podcasts or I go to some sort of guru and, chime chime bells. The truth is, my brain is my
Yeah.
brain is my brain, and it is going to do what it's going to do. And as much as I try and stop it, actually, the older I get, I think I just need to accept myself for who I am and just get on with that. I will say, on a lighter
Yeah.
note, I did laugh when my agent said, "You'll never guess who your number two." I was second to Danielle Steele, which is like the gayest Sunday Times placement, I think, in the history of time. I almost am glad she sold 140 more copies than me. But actually, being number two to Danielle Steele feels like the exact place I should be with Thomas and Gabriel in my book. We're very comfortable there.
So to the book, to The Betrayal of Thomas True, which I read and sort of when I spoke to you and as part of my work on Book Talk and on TikTok and reviewing books, was able to get hold of the book. Why don't you explain the plot to those who don't know?
So, first of all, Molly houses were proto gay bars. Molly's was the name given to gay men in the 1700s. So, we're going back to the 1700s in London. So, this is Georgian London. And we follow Thomas on his first ever journey to go and live in London. He's a young guy and he's got a dark secret. And he finds himself in Mother Clapp's Molly House, which is London's most infamous, most popular, most exciting Molly House. And there he makes friends with Gabriel Griffin. And together they come to realize that one of the Mollys is a traitor, calling themselves the Rat.
Mm.
And the Rat is giving the names of Mollys to a pair of murderous justices who are coming to London ready to carry out raids and pillory and hang Mollys for breaking the sodomy laws.
Mm.
And so they go on an adventure
Mm.
and they have to unmask this rat before they end up hanging at Tyburn, and they have to save the lives of all the Mollys. So it's a thriller and it's an adventure in this secret, dark underworld, the underbelly of Georgian London. And at the same time as that, if that's not complicated enough, it just so happens that Gabriel and Thomas are falling in love.
A great summary of the book, and I'm sure people listening to that will be going, okay, I need to get my hands on it. Yeah, when I picked it up, I wasn't sure what I was going to get from the book because I knew it was historical fiction. It's an area of that I didn't know a huge amount about, and loved the book so much because it is thrilling, it is exciting, it's very funny in places, it has moments that you're going to have to hold on to yourself a little bit. The characters and the entertainment value of it really shine through in the book. It's so enjoyable to read, even over the hard bits. And I was just really struck by the book, but also the Molly story and the Molly houses. And you started to tell the story of the Molly houses on your TikTok videos as well. So what made you choose the Molly houses for the second book? You'd obviously gone to Edwardian England in The Spirit Engineer and spiritualism, which, again, is a huge thing that the Poisoner's Cabinet listeners love. But where did the Molly Houses
It all
story
began
begin
about
for you?
15 years ago when I was working in the radio in London, and I was just lying on my bed one Sunday morning and was listening to a radio program where the transcripts of the court cases in the Old Bailey, the main criminal court in England, were being dramatised. And these Molly houses just appeared in this programme. And I'd never heard the term Molly. I'd never heard the term Molly House or Molly Market or any of this. I just didn't know this history. And I
Mm.
just listened, fascinated by every single detail. And it
Mm.
stuck with me. And I thought, even though it was really fascinating, it was kind of, there was a coldness to the way it was being spoken about because it was being spoken about in a very factual way. It was, these are the transcripts, this is what happened, these are the dates, these are the names.
Mm.
And I thought, me being me, I thought about it from a human point of view, like what did it feel like to be those guys, and what was it really like inside these Molly houses? What were the sights and the sounds and the smells? And so but it was years later,
Mm.
after my time on television, that I met up with a guy who wanted to know some Big Brother gossip, frankly, and worked for a big publisher. And so I asked him advice, and he said it sounds like a brilliant idea for a book, but be careful because queer fiction is something you can get pigeonholed with. Bookshops might turn their noses up. A lot of
Mm.
readers will think it's not for them. You might find yourself stuck on a shelf at the back of the bookshop. It's not necessarily a great debut novel. And I took that advice, and it was, I mean, he
Mm.
wasn't wrong. I'm glad to say I think things have changed in the last kind of 7, 8 years. I think the publishing industry is much more
Yeah.
accepting isn't the right word, much more aware of the fact that people actually love all history and all stories. And if it's about an untold
Mm.
community, then, that's all the better. And that's what I've found. But anyway, so my first novel was written kind of for that
Mm.
reason, The Spirit Engineer. But I always wanted to write this one. So when The Spirit Engineer did really well, I was then in a position, and
Mm.
it was my agent who said, "You have to write this book. You have to." And that was all I needed. So off
Yeah.
I went. Opening of the book is dedicated to the Mollies of Old London, full stop, not forgotten, full stop. And that's what's important to me. I think this is a really important part of our history for so many reasons. To remember these lives, but also to learn from them. I'm really proud of the
Absolutely.
story. Another thing about being a novelist is you're supposed to be constantly, constantly painfully humble about everything. You can't like your own book. Oh, it's dreadful. Oh, I wrote it on the toilet. It's awful. Oh, what
Oh,
this
it's
silly thing.
rubbish. Oh, ugh, ugh,
Like,
ugh.
no,
Oh,
I'm
no,
really
don't.
proud of it.
Nobody read
I
it.
spent 2 years of my life making this book good. Like,
It
I'm
should
gonna
be.
say it's a good book.
With the Mollies as well. So, was the term Molly, was that something that society gave them, or did they adopt it?
There were names
Adopted?
that were given to them against their will, I suppose you could say. Bugger and toe, sodomite, obviously, he whore.
Mm.
But Molly was a name that Mollies used about themselves, as well as it being a descriptive term about them. So, Molly, we think, comes from Latin mollis, meaning soft. And if anyone's heard the term mollycoddling, that's the derivation. It's you will be
Yeah.
so nice to your sons that you'll turn them gay, to use the modern term. That's mollycoddling. So, yeah, so the Molly term
Wow.
was something. In fact, there's a guy called Ned Ward who in 1700 was a tavern keeper, but he also wrote a guidebook for people coming to London who wanted to see the exciting parts of the city, let's say. So, tourist spots, but taverns and bawdy houses and things.
Yes.
And he was not a fan of the Mollies. He was not an ally. And he is one of the only extant sources, one of the only sources from the day where we can actually get a glimpse into the Molly world. And he describes them almost like an infestation. And he describes them as, feminine men speaking like women, as though that's the most degrading thing a man could possibly do. That a man to be
Mm.
feminine, a man to pretend to be a
Right.
female, why would you do that? Why would you debase yourself so? Right? But they were described almost like a plague, like a
Mm.
disease, and they were taking over taverns. And they were too bold and too bright and too loud and too brilliant for the rest of society. And even though we're supposed to take a very dim view of what's being described, actually, as a modern reader, the picture you get is these wonderfully flamboyant, defiant men. And society at the time,
Mm.
its important context, understood homosexuality as misogyny. That it was not the love of men
Yes.
or the attraction to male bodies, it was simply a form of extreme misogyny. You hate women so much that you would rather have sexual intercourse with men. Um, and so it's all wrapped in this really twisted
Mm.
minded kind of perception. The Mollies were the kind of things they were saying to each other. They were emulating and evoking the behavior, the social mores, the language, the movements, the voices of
Mm.
the the kind of the rough and ready women that they were surrounded by, the cockle sellers, the pie sellers,
Mm.
the harlots, the women who were loud and brash and brilliant and, unapologetic. And it was a kind of, if people are imagining it was a little bit like modern drag, it was a cross sort of between a kind of pantomime,
Mm.
drag, secret language mashup. But I really, really, I know there's a conversation amongst some about drag and misogyny, and I do think misogyny actually is a part of gay culture. I hear
Mm.
it a lot when I go to gay bars. So I'm not saying there was no part of that by the modern
Mm,
understanding, but I really get
mm,
the absolute sense that it was adoration and reveration. It was reverence. It was, it was finding a
mm.
truth hidden in yourself that society doesn't allow you to express by emulating the women that you admire.
With that story and with the Molly story, because again, many people will have never heard of that. You had only heard of it from one program. You're telling their story now in fiction, in a wonderful work of fiction, and that's a lot of responsibility to them, but you've dedicated the book to them as well. What's been the reaction with the book as well from people hearing about the
Well, I
Molly's
had,
story?
I had some worries. I worried that, gay readers might not feel an affinity for the characters in the way that I do. I'm thankful to say that certainly hasn't been the case so far. I've got some beautiful messages and reviews from, my kind of LGBTQ peers who have said that it really kind of resonated with them, and there were lots of kind of subtle points in the stories and with the characters that
Mm.
they identified in themselves. I met a guy yesterday at a bookshop who came in. He was so shy, but he said, "I feel like I'm Thomas, and I really feel like you've written so much that I have. I understand
Oh,
Thomas is the first character I've read where I feel like I'm reading kind of parts of myself in his kind of silliness and naivety, but also at the same
wow.
time his desperation to just throw himself into adventure. So it's been a really, really good response. I was worried as well because, we're writing here about guys who are assuming female identities to express themselves in a queer space. And we live in such a toxic world now where there are so many
Mm,
conversations being had around safe spaces and identity and gender and sexuality.
mm,
And I really, it was something I took very seriously while I was writing the book. And I came to realize that actually I was worrying too much about it because it's set in 1700 for a start. And I wanted it to be authentic to the time.
mm, mm,
And I take great care not to assign any modern labels or identities to any of these characters. I write them as human beings,
mm,
fully rounded human beings with their own personalities and their own motivations. And the reader and the characters can decide amongst themselves who they might be if they lived in 2024. But it's not my job as an author to do that. And in a funny
yeah.
way, without getting, on my high horse, I kind of thought, in a way, that goes to the truth of how I feel about these things. I worked in the queer charity sector and I have, queer friends of all identities. And I don't see them as labels. I see them as individuals and human beings, and it doesn't really matter to me what labels there are.
Mm.
And I thought it's that's the way so that's the way I approached it with the book. And I'm pleased to say, at least so far, I've not had anyone trying to make the book into some sort of political treatise for today.
You've written your books in the past. Was there a particular reason you were drawn to historical fiction when you started writing? Obviously, you've said that you always wanted to tell the story of the Molly houses with the Spirit Engineer is set in the
Yeah,
just after the Titanic, isn't it, in Belfast? Was there a particular affinity to historical fiction or wanting to go to the
absolutely.
past?
I've been fascinated by history since I was a kid. In fact, one of my earliest memories is I would leave a stone by a particular leaf or make a mark on a particular part of a fence. And then I'd go back to it a week later, and my my developing brain, was totally and utterly fascinated by the fact that it would still be there. I know that sounds weird, and I don't know, I can't quite
Mm.
put into words why, but I remember the thrill of going back and thinking, I did that, and then I would go back and it was still there. And it was like looking back into my own past. I guess it was my brain making sense of memory, I suppose. But the
Mm.
passage of time and the footprints we leave as people and the way we change our technology, our clothes, our buildings, but we don't change us.
Mm.
Like humanity has not been around for very long. We have not developed and evolved very much at all.
Mm.
The fact that you can go back to,
Mm.
the time when the pyramids were built, and it's very difficult to get your head around how long ago that was, you know, and there are tablets talking about I'm hungover, so I can't come into work today. Like we have not changed, and I've always been fascinated by that. So
Mm,
historical fiction was the obvious place to go, and there's a particular power, I think, in historical fiction to be able to bring a world to life that just offers an adventure. Like one of my favorite series is the
mm,
late great C.J. Sansom Shard Lake series, and I call my books time travel
mm.
precisely because that's what they mean to me. When I read great historical fiction, it's time travel. If I could have any superpower, that's what it would be. To go back and see what Elizabeth I really looked like,
Yeah.
you know? Well,
We were
yeah.
talking
I
about
mean,
her recently. Yeah. Yeah. Like, what,
she's such a
really?
fascinating figure.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think she's just incredible because, again, another example actually of history sometimes being simplified and being given a modern sensibility. She left the sailors
Mm.
who won the sea battle with the Spanish Armada on the ships to starve because she didn't want to pay them. She left them to die of disease and starvation because she didn't want to pay them, right? That only makes me more fascinated by her. So to go back to Tudor London and see her, going
Mm.
going along the Strand, past Charing Cross or something would be just the most thrilling thing. But an entirely dangerous place.
The smell would be terrible. Yeah. It
Although
would not
actually
be a
part of
pretty
my
place. Yeah.
research for the Betrayal of Thomas True, because I really did kind of geek out on the research, I went to meet the head of kind of Georgian
Yeah.
clothing and costume at the Victoria and Albert Museum, and went down this long,
Mm.
kind of echoey, very smart Victorian corridor and found her office. And it was wonderful inside, like all these pictures of all these old costumes. But one of the things she was expert in actually was hygiene at the time. And I was saying to her, how would I
Mm.
unbutton a man's breeches in 1715? And she kind of raised her eyebrow, and I said, it's very important. It's about gay men in the Molly culture. And she's like, yes. She said, this is the question I've been waiting for my entire career. Because normally people just want to know about the gowns and the silks and the hats and the wigs, right? And she's like, no, this is what I
Yeah.
love. So she did. She told me you would unbutton this and unbutton that, and there might be laces around here. But one of the things she said was actually, people weren't quite as stinky and putrid as we might imagine. Of course, the ability to be stinky and
Mm.
putrid was easier. So if you were
Yeah.
a ragamuffin or you were a knave or you were a pickpocket or something, then of course you might be very stinky indeed. But actually, general society wasn't covered in grime and slime. They would dry wash basically.
Yeah.
So and we're all kind of, I think,
Yeah.
slightly hoodwinked by our world today into thinking you have to have mint scented shampoos and conditioners and this, that, and the other. Otherwise, we'll all go
Mm.
around stinking like oxes. Actually, a good rough bit of cloth scrubbed under the old armpits and in the nether regions can do more than we imagine. And they did. Um,
It's a
and
lovely
so they
image.
weren't they weren't quite as stinky. However, is this like an 18 rating podcast?
Yeah, we're fine.
Blowjob. English gay guys, English people generally, as far as the researchers can see, did not give blowjobs. The French did, but that's the French for you.
Uh,
But in England, in the British Isles, it wasn't the done thing. It was seen as really, really, really dirty. I have a weird theory that Anne Boleyn,
mm.
the thing she did with Henry VIII to beguile him, because there's a bit of a mystery about exactly what she did. I reckon blowjobs. Anyway,
Well, because she was in the French court for a very long time, and there's a lot of theories about she
exactly,
learned some tricks there
exactly.
and then came back.
So,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
whole history of like religion and political culture could just be Anne Boleyn giving head. Anyway,
Could
the
just
point
be. Yeah.
I'm making is that bodies were obviously not as clean as they are today, but it wasn't as stinky as we might think. But of course, the effluent
Mm.
and the detritus and the rotting animals and
Yeah.
the horse muck, yeah, that was pretty skanky.
It's a part of the world building, isn't it? It's part of the scenery with it. Within the book, and again, we're laughing there. One of the things that I noticed with the book and that I particularly enjoy, because I always enjoy it when authors do that, is the humor in it, is the wit and the fun that you had with the story. While it is serious in parts and it is a thriller, was a lot of humor, and it could have been a bleak story. You hear the words, maybe people would make assumptions. If you hear, oh, it's a story about the Molly houses in the 1700s, most people probably would be right in thinking, oh, well, that's not going to have a happy ending, because what an awful time to be gay, and this hidden bit of society, there's going to be awful repercussions. So it could have been a very bleak story, but it isn't. It has that humor and that warmth all the way through it. And I think I'm not really one for annotating books at all, but I did get a sticky note out when I was reading it. Just I think it was chapter 20, when you've got Thomas with his uncle about the candles and the jokes you were putting in, and just there, and just him just like thinking away, and the uncle shouting thick and firm. I couldn't stop laughing at that, where he's just daydreaming and he's got his uncle describing these candles around him.
I
I
had
thought that was
great fun.
brilliant. I wanted to ask, it may seem like a redundant question, but was that a conscious choice, that you wanted to make the story funny or warm because it is a serious subject? Or is that more about you? Is that just you that's how you choose to write, that's that coming through?
I like writing funny characters. It served a purpose, definitely, because there's some really, there's some darkness there that had to be dealt with. And I think it had to be dealt with face on. I wanted to stare the past and the wrongs of the past in the eye with this book and challenge the readers to do the same with me, holding my hand. But I also did want people to laugh. I had great fun writing the Squinks candle makers. I thought it was hilarious, the idea that they would basically
Yeah.
invent scented candles on, in 1700s on London Bridge, and everyone would be like, "Who would
It's
want a
so
scented
good.
candle? What would ever be the point of that?" Because I love candles. So no, I had great fun with some of the characters, and it was inspired by exactly the research I was carrying out. That here I was reading transcripts from a court case where men are facing the noose for love. So this really dark and frightening situation, and amidst it, you're hearing the testimony of people who have basically been sent undercover into the molly houses as moles to testify against the guys, the mollies. And the conversations that they're reporting between the mollies are filled with laughter and joy. You know, the molly houses were
Mm.
such extraordinarily bright and beautiful, noisy places. The laughter and the singing, the sex, the titillation, the gowns. And we've not really described what Mother Clapp's Molly House was like, but put simply, if I can take us there, you go along Field Lane, which was a
Yeah.
dark and dangerous lane on High Holborn in London. It would become famous as Fagin's Lair in Charles Dickens' Oliver Twist over a century later. Very, very
Yes.
turgid place. And you'd go past these taverns with sailors singing shanties and whores shouting out their offers to the passing gentleman, and would walk past the Bunch of Grapes Tavern, and next to it is a darkened archway. And up the darkened archway is a narrow staircase. And at the top of the staircase, we push the door open, and there we would find in real life, this is not the way I write it in my book, but effectively a room, a single room with doors running off it. And this is a boarding house and a quasi coffee house. And in there would be the drum and the fiddle and a big roaring hearth. And there would be the Mollies dressed in gowns with Molly names, behaving like women, carrying out rituals. They had birthing rituals with a wooden doll where they'd pretend to give birth to the doll. And they would marry, which meant going to the chapel room, which was a room with a double bed in it, and they would have sex. And sometimes they'd leave the door closed and they'd come out and boast about what they'd been up to. Sometimes they'd leave the doors open and let people cheer them on. And so it was this like a complete sensory overload. But amidst this, you had this extraordinary woman called Mother Clap, who didn't run her Molly House as a money making scheme, as far as we can tell. She didn't get rich from it. Her husband was a tavern keeper, but she'd be running up and down the stairs fetching jugs of hot wine and beer for her patrons. But she just seems to have loved the Mollies. She was part of this community, and indeed, she put her own neck on the line quite literally. She went to court cases and gave false testimony to get them off, to save their lives effectively, and boasted about it. But also, her boasting is ultimately what was the undoing of them all. And so you have this juxtaposition of extraordinary danger and tragedy, but
Yeah.
amidst this party atmosphere.
Is very vividly drawn, and again, the characters, particularly in the book as well, you've these incredible, larger than life, vivid, vibrant, crazy characters in there, and you've talked about where you got the inspiration from real life, from real people. I was going to ask, who are you more like? Are you more Thomas or are you more Gabriel?
I'm definitely
So the
more
two main
Thomas. I've
protagonists.
been unofficially diagnosed dyspraxic and ADHD. Now I don't know about that, and I feel as I'm, at 42, I feel like I'm beyond diagnosis. But I'm very flighty and scatterbrained. I get lost all the time. I lose things constantly. I've got 3 bags from the tour that are at 3 different hotels that I'm going to have to go back and pick up because I just keep leaving things and losing things. I'm kind of anxious, but I love adventure. I will, if you give me the faintest whiff of some
Mm.
sort of reckless escapade, I'm there. You know, I don't care. I throw everything up in the air and off I go. And but also really
Mm.
insecure about how I look, about, body issues. And it took me a long time to be comfortable with sex
Mm.
because I was so nervous and in my own head about it that
Mm.
I couldn't, be intimate
Mm.
with people. So all of these things, and too trusting as well of other people. When I first came to London, I thought, well, we're all gay, and we all have that in common. So therefore, we're all going to be best friends, and everyone's going to be lovely. And I found out pretty fast that that wasn't the case. That actually, some of the kindest, sweetest people in my life at the time
Mm.
were my straight male friends, and some of the most difficult personalities that I met when I first came to London were gay friends, and got myself hurt
Mm.
and probably behaved pretty poorly myself, to be honest.
Mm.
And so all of that is
Mm.
is written into Thomas. He's not me, but my experience inspired it. And Gabriel for me represents some of the men that
Mm.
I admire in my life, and women actually I admire in my life as well,
Yeah.
who are stoic and kind of determined, but he carries a certain sadness
Mm.
with him that Thomas is a medicine to.
Yes. There's such a lovely couple in it, and Thomas, as you said, is so full of joy and sort of naivety. Both of them have a sadness, and Gabriel, this very imposing figure as well, but again struggling with who he is and trying to overcome his sadness and what he really wants from life, and their journey through it. And I think that's as a very heartfelt love story and that gentleness to it. But also at the backdrop of this thriller that you've written as well, of we have the Molly Houses story, and this is vivid and a fascinating slice of history that maybe people have not heard about. We're learning with that. We have these two with Thomas and Gabriel, and the cast of Mollies around who are all just so vivid, and them falling in love. But we do have a thriller on our hands here as well. So you've got the 3 elements to it, but this race against time to try and find out who the rat is, to save the Mollies, and what happens along the way. And it gets quite brutal at points as well. You didn't pull any punches there of what would happen to the Mollies and when people are being killed. With the thriller element of it, was that wanting to add a layer of excitement, or was that always the plan at the start when you wanted to tell the Molly's story?
At the heart of it was always Gabriel and Thomas, and their love for
Mm.
each other. I was fascinated by a character who doesn't know what love is, and yet
Mm.
they love. I've met that in other people who've
Yeah.
said similar things. I don't really understand. I don't really know how to be a good friend, and yet they've literally just spent the last 3 years being the most extraordinary friend. So I kind of wanted to explore that and the idea of two
Mm.
guys. There's a lot of body dysmorphia in the gay scene, and 2 guys who find each other attractive but find themselves
Mm.
ugly. I wanted to write that. So there were these themes that I wanted to write
Mm.
into the book. It was once I'd written the first draft, which is 150, 60,000 words, and I met up with my agent, who's an editing
Mm.
agent, which means that they take an interest in the prose, and they help sculpt the book before you go out on submission
Mm.
to a publisher. Said it's a beautiful love story, but I want there to be more movement, more energy in it. I want there to be a greater sense of danger. I want it, it's a thriller. I can tell it's a
Mm.
thriller, but the thriller is hiding behind the love story at the moment. And I want to see if you can bring the both out. So I rewrote the whole thing from scratch because I couldn't just tweak chapters with that. I couldn't just remove one
Mm.
character or anything. That was 90,000 words. It was only one publisher of the ones that it went to on submission wanted it. We really love the thrill element and it's really strong, but we'd like some more of the love. And we want to get to know Thomas and Gabriel more. So then I thought I can't possibly rewrite the whole thing. So I started trying to tweak the chapters again and realized no, I have to. So again, back
Mm.
to a blank page and wrote it again from scratch to
Mm.
110,000 words. And the only chapter that exists from the first to the second to the third is chapter 13, which is the first time the Justices Grimp and Maya appear. That's the only chapter that exists. So,
Yes.
but I think I'm glad to hear, it's really sweet what you were saying then about the pacing and stuff, and as well as the heart. I think on the
Mm.
third run at it, I managed to get that balance where I wanted it to be.
With the crime element, I think, for our listeners, obviously we're a true crime podcast. There's just endless fascination. People can't get enough of true crime. Thomas True is a work of fiction, but it is based on crimes that actually happened. We've asked this of other writers before as well, but was there a difficulty in writing the thriller, knowing everyone's fascination with true crime and that it's the biggest sort of genre that's out there, to try and write a thriller that keeps people guessing?
I am a fan of classic crime fiction, Sherlock Holmes and the like. Hmm. I kind of had fun with it, really. Those were the easy bits to write, hinting at who the rat might be and writing scenes where the rat appeared. And, when one of the characters sees the rat at one point and then we leave the chapter, just as he sees the rat and goes, "What are
Yes.
you doing here?" You know, I loved
Yes.
writing all of that. So actually, no, I found that the most pleasurable thing to write, probably, or the easiest in a funny way, without sounding arrogant. The only thing that worried
Yeah.
me was that I'd given too many clues as to who the rat was. So I was very relieved when reviews started coming in and
Mm.
readers started reading that the vast majority of people don't guess who the rat is.
I think that works. It's something that we've asked the listeners, and I've spoken to on book club as well, where we're all talking about with thrillers that there needs to be some hint there. You need to be able to work it out. And do people prefer to be able to work it out, or do you not mind being sort of blindsided in a Sarah Pinborough kind of way of okay, there's no possible way that you can see that coming. And the vast majority of people are like, no, I want a hint. I want to be able to work it out and everything. And yeah, that's the best kind, is that you can kind of get there and go, oh, okay.
It's satisfying, I think, when you get to the end of a novel and you can think back to what's happened before and think, yes, that makes sense. And how
Yeah.
did I not guess that? And I'm very pleased to say that there are people who've already read Thomas True, two, three, even four times,
Mm.
precisely because they want to see it again, knowing what they know and
Yeah.
seeing clues that they didn't realize were there the first time. And that's what I'm like. I like doing
Yeah.
that.
Piece
Going,
it
I
together.
didn't notice that. Of course.
So, some quick fire questions for you. One of those maybe is not a quick way to answer it, but however you wish to, is what are your tips for aspiring writers, for people out there who are similar journey, like I want to sit and write a book? What's the advice that you would give them, the sort of number one advice?
Yeah, it's such an important question and such a difficult one to answer because I don't feel like my route into being a published author was a particularly straightforward one. It's certainly not the traditional way of getting in. I mean, the best advice you can get is to have quite a lot of money, have friends who work in publishing, and and look like and sound like everyone else is a good start. If you don't have those aces in the pack, then I think the most important thing is
Mm.
to hold your hold your ideas for your books close to your heart. Close your eyes and think about each idea that you've had and wait for that feeling that you know. Mine is like a tickly feeling in my heart. I don't know what yours is, but that feeling that
Mm.
tells you that you're excited. And just take a moment and understand why that feeling has come to you for that particular idea. Because what you've got there is the diamond center of the story you're going to write. And you're going to need to cling on to that for
Mm.
dear life, because writing a novel is going through a process
Mm.
of loving and hating what you've written. And you're going to need to know why you love it,
Yeah.
because you'll forget and it will become ordinary to you. But that feeling you have is the feeling you're going to hand as a gift to a reader. And that's why they're going to remember your book for the rest of their life. Forget all the stuff about it has to have these sorts of characters, it has to have this kind of plot. If it's going to sell, you've got to be commercial, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. Yeah, there are authors who make themselves very successful doing that, but I'm speaking to people who are
Mm.
writers and novelists to their soul, who find pleasure actually in the act
Mm.
of writing stories. It's very easy to have the joy stripped out of the process. So,
Yeah.
yes.
That's great advice. That's a lovely way of looking at it. So, can you name a favourite author, or is that impossible?
I love CJ Sansom. I love
Mm-hmm.
Sarah Waters.
Oh, she's great, right?
Oh my gosh, there's no one does a historical fiction twist
When's
like
she going to
Sarah
write
Waters.
again? That's the thing. When's her next book? Where is it?
Oh, I yes, I know. I mean, I suppose she isn't under pressure to, or maybe she's kind of
Mm.
taking the right time to come back with the right thing. She must be,
Mm.
there's so much expectation. I love Charles Dickens, Austen. I mean,
Mm.
I suppose probably my favorite author of all time is probably Thomas Hardy, because he writes such extraordinarily tragic gloom, but he is also extremely funny. And the first book I ever read that had a huge emotional impact on me was Jude the Obscure. And anyone
Oh.
who's read that book, there's a point, I don't know, two-thirds of the way through, that hit me around the face with a
Mm.
plank of wood. I just almost fell on the floor at this point. It was such a shock.
Mm.
I just could not believe what I'd read. And I remember thinking at the time, if I can do something even akin to that one day as an author, then I'll have made
Do
it.
you have a favourite book from childhood?
Wind in the Willows.
Classic. Classic for a reason. Are you a hard copy or a Kindle person? Do you have a strong feeling either way?
Well, I am hard copy or audiobook. Audiobook is my
Mm.
best friend. I
Nice.
thought I struggle to sleep in silence, so I fall asleep every night to a non-fiction audiobook normally about Elizabeth I, funnily enough. That's my happy place. But if I'm reading a physical book, so to speak, then it will be a hardback. Kindle, I think, is something I need to get onto though. I really do, because I'm going on holiday
Mm.
later this year and I actually want to read lots of books that have been on my
Yeah,
TBR for a long time, and Kindle is the way to do it. So
they are handy. Lovely. Do you annotate books or do you leave them pristine?
I fold corners over, I rip covers, I take them to the bath and they get crinkly and wet along with me. I annotate books, I draw in them, write in them, scribble in them, put coffee mugs down on them. I personally love a book the more used and
Yeah,
loved it looks.
well,
A
bet.
bit like my teddy bear from when I'm a kid. I can look at that teddy bear and I can see that is a lot of hugs. And, for me, I wouldn't want a
Aw.
library filled with pristine books,
You want books
personally.
that have been hugged.
I know. Yes, yes. Books that have been hugged. Exactly. That should be my podcast. But no, if you look at my bookshelves and you see a book that looks brand new, you can be certain I haven't read it.
And finally, which is maybe a weird question for you, but it's one we ask everyone. What is your favourite poison?
My favorite poison would have to be potassium cyanide, which is what my first character in my debut novel, William Jackson Crawford, took his own life with in real life as well as in my book. Now, I say my favorite because I'd rather he hadn't done it, but
Mhm.
that poison and that terrible, horrible thing that he felt at the time he wanted or had to do to himself is,
Mm.
in a way, a kind of dark gift that he gave me because it gave me his story and it was the start of my career as a writer.
Yeah, it's a thorough answer, that one. I like it. It has a backstory. AJ, it's been fantastic talking to you. Just remind us, people who are listening, where they can get the book, how they can access it, and anything new you're working on as well. What will we see from you in the future?
So you can buy The Betrayal of Thomas True from pretty much anywhere you think of. It's lovely if you have a local independent bookshop, they'll be able to order it in for you, and so you can support them that way. But yes, it is on Amazon. It is in high street bookshops. If you're listening to this abroad, it's out in North America in October 2024, and it's going to be elsewhere besides. If you look at the link on my bio, there's a link there for various different buying options. So it would mean a lot if you bought it. And please do let me know if you do. Let me know what you think and follow me on social. I'll follow you back. And then the next one is going to be even further back in time. And that is all I can say.
Ooh, excellent. Well, glad that we'll be hearing more from you in the future. AJ, it's been absolutely fantastic talking to you. Thank you for being so honest and so passionate about a really, really wonderful book that I do urge people to read, that because you will have a wonderful time reading this book. It's been great speaking to you, hearing about you and about the process and the reality of writing. And congratulations again on a bestseller.
Well, my gratitude goes to you. I don't know if listeners know this, how hard you actually work and how professional and how amazing and how kind you are with your guests, because I have mucked you around something rotten because I've been on this tour and I could not find anywhere with decent Wi-Fi and quiet solitude where I could do this interview. So listeners should know that behind the scenes, you are just the bee's knees.
Oh, bless you. Thank you so much. Yeah, listeners. Yeah, there you go. They know me. It's fine. Thank you so much, AJ. We hope you have enjoyed this latest interview with our latest expert witness. Please do get The Betrayal of Thomas True wherever you can. It's a genuinely lovely book. If you are a book lover, a book reader, a book eater, you might consider joining the Poisoner's Cabinet own Belladonna Book Club. This is a simple Facebook group where you can request to join and we gab about books. We will pick a different book to buddy read every 6 weeks or so, but the group is also open to people who simply want to post about what they're reading, share bookish tips, talk about the Poisoner's Cabinet, and have a conversation with some genuinely lovely people. In addition, our Patreon subscribers also get to join a regular book club Zoom meeting with the Poisoner's Cabinet to talk about the book of the month. If you have other suggestions of expert witnesses you'd love the Poisoner's Cabinet to really grill, feel free to email us at thepoisonerscabinet@gmail.com or contact us via our website www.thepoisonerscabinet.com or on any of the social media channels that you follow us on. Thanks for listening. In the meantime, keep reading, keep talking about poison, and remember, your loved ones are trying to kill you.